Welcome, everybody, to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's Live Better series. I'm Rob Girth. I'm the Director of Digital Media here with the Foundation. Today we are talking about wheelchair tennis, and we're lucky enough to have two experts with us today who we'll meet in just a minute. But a little housekeeping first. We're going to take question and answer at the end, and you can do that by putting your question into the chat feature there, or you'll be able to call in. And you'll be able to talk live to our guests if you want to do that. And again, we're going to hold off to the end of that. But to give us a little bit of the detail of that, I'm going to let Susan, our operator, explain it.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to join us via phone, you may dial 1-800-931-1309. Later, we will conduct a question and answer session. At that time, if you're listening to the presentation via phone, you may press the 1 followed by the 4 to register for your questions. If you're listening via the web, you may use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen and type in your questions. And as a reminder, this presentation is being recorded today, Wednesday, March 13th, 2013. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And so now it's time to meet our host for today, which is Candace Cable, and her guest is Brad Parks. And it's funny because as I'm listening to them sort of chat back and forth with each other before we got the show started, I'm realizing these guys were there. I mean, you don't think about a sport having a beginning because most sports seem to always have existed. But these guys were there at the beginning, and I'm going to let Candace talk to you a little bit about Brad. But when I talk about Candace, I mean, she was there at a very, very young age, was there in the sport of wheelchair racing, helping to invent the sport and what it was. And she, if I'm not wrong, she has 12 Paralympic medals in 3 different sports. So I just am fascinated. To me, it's like I'm getting to talk to these great sporting people that you just never get to talk to. And here I am. I've got 2 of them on the phone right now. So go ahead, Candace, take over.
Oh, thanks, Rob. I know, been around for a long time, both Brad and I. Well, thanks, everybody. Welcome to our webcast here at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. It's an honor, and I'm super grateful that you're joining us because today in our Spotlight Sport we have wheelchair tennis. And with us as our guest authority in wheelchair tennis is Brad Parks. Brad Parks had a spinal cord injury, and to call Brad an authority, is just really not enough because it doesn't tell the tale. I mean, he can tell us, and he's going to tell us today, how to play the sport and explain the rules, but really, Brad was a pioneer and founder of wheelchair tennis. And while he was in the hospital, recovering from his spinal cord injury, Brad was introduced to the emerging sport of wheelchair tennis by his rec therapist, and he was inspired. And after playing in his very first wheelchair tennis in Griffith Park in 1977, of which we both played in, actually. I know, can you believe it? Anybody who knows me will not believe I ever played wheelchair tennis. Brad founded the National Foundation of Wheelchair Tennis. And something I really like that was in his bio that was sent out was the purpose of the National Foundation of Wheelchair Tennis was to promote physical and psychological well-being among people with disabilities, that regardless of age, sex, creed, or disability, that they should be able to participate in an event like this. And it went on, that was 1980. So from there, he helped organize the first international wheelchair tennis, and that was the U.S. Open, and it was held in Irvine, California, and he was the chairman of that event for 18 years. Now, Brad has accomplished so much. U.S. Open singles title, 1980, 85, 87, 10-time U.S. Open doubles champion, the inaugural Paralympic wheelchair tennis event in 1992, doubles gold medal. His accomplishments in wheelchair tennis are above and beyond. But the bigger part is that he helped organize what today there are over 157 tournaments in 41 countries with over $1.5 million in prize money because of the first organizing of the National Foundation of Wheelchair Tennis. I mean, if you look at it, there's a mimicking of wheelchair tennis that is above and beyond any adaptive sport that's out there right now. It mimics everything. It has a U.S. Open, it has a World Team Cup, it has a Players Association, and an international federation, of which Brad was the inaugural president in 1988. And then he went on to serve on the management committee for many years and was the driving force behind the International Wheelchair Tennis and has now been fully integrated since 1998 into the International Tennis Federation, which, you know, is really the first disabled sport to make that achievement on an international level. And over 100 countries now have wheelchair tennis programs, and the sport is played in 4 Grand Slams. I mean, that's mainstreaming right there. And Brad, just, you know, he retired from competition in, when did you retire from competition, Brad?
Well, I just sort of kind of died a slow death. I just slowly kind of, I never really did the big announcement or anything. But it was about around 95, 96 when I stopped playing at a high level, sort of in the early 90s in singles, and then I continued to play doubles, and I still played pretty well, and up through the Paralympics in '92. And after the Paralympics in '92, I was pretty much done, but I still liked to play, so I would occasionally play tournaments and usually doubles, but I think it was in '95 when they had the first Masters competition that the International Tennis Federation ran. It was a year-end competition, and I think it was the top 8, and I think I just squeaked in as the top 8 singles player, and I played, and I lost in the first round. But anyway, it was. I don't think I ever played a tournament after that. So I think it was at the end of 1995, as I recall.
Okay, and so then in 1995, you weren't inactive. I mean, from these slides here, you stayed very active with scuba diving, golf, skiing, and family. I mean, you're married, you have 2 beautiful daughters, and you also work in the real estate, right?
Yes. Well, we ran the organization, continued to run the organization through 1998, and we took a little over a year, as I recall, in 1988, the ITF took over all our international operations, and we slowly handed those things to them. We handed them the World Team Cup, which is an event that we held here in the United States for, 5 or 6 years, and then they took that over, and then we hired Ellen DeLonga as a paid executive secretary with the International Tennis Federation to run wheelchair tennis internationally. So then the rules and all the international development all went under her umbrella, but I served as the president for many years of our organization. It was a volunteer position at that. But then we ran the United States operations, and we ran our U.S. Open. We ran all our development programs and scheduled the tournaments and everything else here in the United States through 1998. And then in 1998, the USTA took it over, and that was a process as well. And then I served on their committee for a number of years before I'd never really have gotten completely out of tennis, because then Randy had all his tennis camps, and he and Balmore, and so they recruited me to teach a lot of those camps over the years, and I still, to this day, I'm still involved with some camps, and I'm involved in some things with the international. I serve as an ambassador to the International Tennis Federation for wheelchair tennis, so I still have some involvement, but not nothing day to day or nothing big.
Well, for our listeners that may not know, when Brad mentioned Randy Snow was also beginning in tennis around the same time Brad did, and they were great adversaries on the court and deep friends off the court, and so there was a great rivalry that the two of you had throughout.
Yes, we had a heck of a rivalry. It was great. The first 10 years of our U.S. Open, the two of us were the only ones who won that tournament. Of course, he won it 7 times. But anyway, we had he was the one guy that was always tough for me from really the very first U.S. Open. I played him in the finals of the very first U.S. Open in 1980, which we called the National Championships then. And then he beat me the next year and went on to win 10 U.S. Open singles titles, which I don't think anybody will ever come close to doing.
Yes, it's a phenomenal feat. I think during those 1980 years and through the early 90s was such a growing period that I believe that most of the people that were involved in adaptive sport at that time, and you can verify this with me if you want, they're just were so creative and energized by the fact that there was sport and something to do after their spinal cord injuries. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That I can't tell you what wheelchair sports has done for me. When I got hurt and met really one of the first really inspirations to me, as a wheelchair athlete, was I think it was you as well as Jeff Minnebraker, and he introduced me to the wheelchair games in those days, which was track and field, swimming, and pretty much it. But those games were fantastic opportunities to meet other athletes and just to be able to participate in sports again. And of course, they had wheelchair basketball in those days as well, which were great. Played a little bit of that, but it was those games were special, as you I'm sure remember and agree.
No, absolutely. So I want to go back in time a little bit here. I want to talk about what it was like for you growing up, and what were some of the things. It looks like you were active growing up, and what were some of the things that your parents taught you that helped you move forward after your spinal cord injury?
Well, the parents were always very encouraging with sports. We had a great neighborhood where we played sports in the neighborhood, neat group of kids that I grew up with, and I loved baseball as a little kid. We had a basketball court in our backyard. I loved to skateboard. I loved to surf, water ski. We had a boat pretty much all my life, and I learned to water ski when I was probably about 5 years old. And but I can remember when I had a brother 2 years older, and watching him play Little League baseball for the first year, and me sitting there at the fence and just have my fingers through the fence and just wanting to be out there so bad. And and I just, he was sort of my first, role model, I guess, as far as, somebody I wanted to get out there and play baseball with him. And it was, this is a photo of my Little League baseball team on the Yankees there, and I just love sports. I was always very enthusiastic about it, and and in fact the lower photo is just a photo from University of Utah, my first year as a freshman in college, when I played on our team. It was a dorm football, flag football, and we won the championships amongst the dorms. But it was I just always loved to play and compete.
Well, you were at the University of Utah, and you were a skier, and I'm looking at these pictures, and I'm wondering, where did you find the courage, to fly through the air like a gymnast on skis, and how did that courage move forward in your life also?
Well, when we started skiing, I think when I was about 11 years old, as a family, and I think my parents gave us an opportunity. Do you guys want to go to Hawaii, or would you like to all learn how to ski? And I think we all said skiing. I know I did. And so we took up skiing as a family, and we would drive up to Park City in those days, and we would go to Mammoth, and we'd go to our local mountains, and Big Bear, and but I think it was probably just going to the ski stores, and they would have little videos of the kind of hot dog skiers and stuff back in those days. This would be the early 70s, And you'd see guys doing flips. And I remember one time being at Snow Valley, which is near Big Bear, and seeing some guys do flips off this little jump off the side of the run. And I remember sitting there for probably an hour before I had the courage to go and do that. And the interesting thing is I could never do a flip. When I was a kid growing up, I had friends who could do flips off the diving boards and things, and I never could. So I actually learned how to do a flip just so I could do it on skis. And so I learned on the diving board, and I eventually started bouncing trampoline and getting lessons in trampoline to learn. And then I went to a ski camp in Washington. I think it was just after my junior year in high school, and they taught us. It was a freestyle ski camp, up in Washington. And anyway, so I did get a lot of good instruction, and I learned the proper way, I should say, back in those days, considering it was real pioneering. Kind of like tennis was. It was just it was all such a new sport in those days, and people were getting hurt in those early days, and fortunately, I was one of those guys. And
this is the way you got injured with your spinal cord injury, was freestyle skiing?
Yeah. Well, when I went to the...
And how did it happen?
Well, I was at the University of Utah, and I went to school there so I could ski. That was the main reason. Like my parents, I wanted to take a year off of school. My parents said, no, we won't pay your way through college. They said, you have to go to college straight through. So I said, okay. So I went to the University of Utah where I could get up and ski as much as possible. So anyway, I joined an amateur freestyle circuit. It was a tour of probably 6 to 10 events around that area. Utah. I think they had a couple in Colorado as well. And it was freestyle skiing. So they had the aerials, which is the flipping and things, jumps, and then they had the bump runs. They called them moguls in those days. And then they had a thing they called trick skiing or ballet skiing, which I didn't really compete in that. I just competed in the deals. The day before I got hurt, I had to qualify, and I tried to qualify for two jumps. One was the back gainer flip, which is what I'm showing in the red there on the left, and the other was a full twisting back flip. They called it the Mobius flip in those days. So you'd go off and do a back gainer like that, but do a full twist inside of it. And I slightly missed a couple of those, so I couldn't qualify for that, but I qualified easily for the back flip. I had done hundreds and hundreds of those things successfully, and the next day was the competition, and they just opened the jumps up for warm-ups, and I did a warm-up off of it and crashed, over-rotated and crashed, and immediately knew I had severed my spinal cord or broke my back. I couldn't feel my legs, and pretty scary moment.
So you immediately knew that something had happened?
Yes.
Oh, great insight. And you were shipped off to Rancho Los Amigos Hospital in Los Angeles, California?
Well, a month later, I was actually a month in the intensive care with surgery and that sort of thing, and then I came home for the weekend, and then shipped off to the same place that you were at.
That's right. I was alumni by just barely maybe a week or something. I was just leaving while you were coming. And so once you were at Rancho Los Amigos, what were some of the thoughts going through your head? You seem to be a kid that really loved to be active and outdoors and busy, and now you're going to be using a wheelchair. How did you keep your hopes up? How'd you move through this and move forward?
Well, I was, the first, I can remember the first day I'd come home. When I was in the hospital in Utah, I began to ponder my future, and I thought, okay, I had this attitude that I was competing in the Olympics, and my Olympics was, my wheelchair, to be the best that I could be in the wheelchair. And I thought of tennis as a sport. I really wanted to learn to play tennis, and I thought, I wonder if a guy can play in a wheelchair. So I was kind of determined to try to play wheelchair tennis. I figured, I would maybe try wheelchair basketball. But I really just wanted I wanted people, my friends, to think of me as just Brad, the way they've always thought of me. I didn't want them to have pity on me. I didn't want them to think, oh, poor Brad, he's in a wheelchair. I wanted to encourage my friends. When they came to the hospital to visit me, I wanted them to encourage them. And I wanted them to continue to want to be friends with me. So I just tried. After I got home, I was kind of like comfortable, and then I spent like a day or two at home, and then I went to Rancho. And I got to Rancho, and I'm in this hospital room with 5 other guys, and they were all quads, and I just said, man, get me out of here. I did not want to be in that room. But within the next day, I got to know the guys, and we all became great friends, and I wanted to learn to walk on the braces. I wanted to learn to do wheelies and be good in the wheelchair, and I just was very determined. I wanted to come out of the rehab strong, and I wanted to be able to do stuff. And I was just determined. And like I said, I looked at it as being my Olympics, and I was going to train. And I gave myself a year. I said, in a year, I want to really work hard in a year. And it's like, okay, then we can kind of see, what's possible.
Well, so the Christopher and Dana Reese Foundation has a peer mentoring program that is a few years old, and I'm wondering, while you were in the hospital, you had these thoughts of just wanting to do your Olympics, and you were going to work as hard as possible. Were there any words of wisdom that came forward from other people that you met or family members that, helped move you into that mindset?
Well, honestly, meeting you really encouraged me. I met you. You came by and visited me within a week of me being in the hospital there, being in the rehab center. And you rolled into the room with this big smile. You were cute. You were, you just looked so normal and had a huge smile on your face. And you kind of said, I don't remember exactly what you said, but I know you said something to the fact that, it's going to get better. And just seeing you made a huge difference, because you looked like this normal girl, cool, happy girl, just happened to be in a wheelchair. And you had a very big impact on me when you came into the room. And it was there were a lot of hard moments there at the hospital. I had all these quads in my room, so I felt lucky from that standpoint. But then I remember this one guy who kind of was young and about my age and really active looking and all, and he ended up walking out. He got better, and that was kind of encouraging in a way. It was like, well, it was jealousy. I was jealous. I was, so there was, I saw kind of both sides of I was somewhere in the middle. I wasn't, I didn't walk out of there, but I felt lucky in many ways, and I felt, so I felt like, I realized right then is life is not fair, and this is not what I wanted in life at any stretch of the imagination, but I was going to just make the best of it. And Ed Owen was our rec therapist in those days, and he was a real positive guy. And even though he had polio, which was a little bit different, he was very impressive to me as a wheelchair athlete. His basketball skills those are my two first role models. Was you, even though it was so very brief, and then Ed. And then about a month later, I met Jeff Minnerbreaker, who was more similar with a spinal cord injury, and he was playing tennis, and that encouraged me because I had just started to play tennis, and I found some other guy in a wheelchair who was playing tennis, and it was Jeff, and he'd been doing it for a while and was teaching at the time at Griffith Park, and I remember, wow, and plus Jeff had his own wheelchair that he made.
Right, and yeah,
maybe I'm jumping too far. I don't know, but it was just
no. We're moving right forward into it. And first, I wanted to say thank you for those really kind words. It means a ton to me that that I did something that was a natural move, and I think it is for most people when they experience traumatic injury and they meet someone else, they want to encourage them to keep going forward. And I haven't ever met anyone in all these years that has discouraged me, you know. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And I have a question online here of what your level of injury is.
I'm a T11, T12, complete.
Okay, great. And so back to Jeff with the equipment. You sent me a couple great slides of, you know, those very first chairs that Jeff started making, and then you were involved with that. How important did the change in the equipment, the lightweight wheelchair, affect the forward movement of wheelchair tennis?
It was so huge. I remember, you know, my first chair, you know, was the Everson Jennings 6-inch caster, 60-pound hospital chair. The only thing I had was air tires. Had the side guards and the brakes and all those things. The same chair that you, I'm sure, left there with. Big old 4-inch cushion and all, and because we all got the same chairs. So I remember having this buddy of mine, Scott Willingham, who's a ski buddy of mine, freestyle skier. He was world champion, in fact, in '76, and he was probably one of the first guys. Actually, the first people I played tennis with was my parents. But I remember telling Scott, he came down to my house and we played, and I said, I'm going to get a new chair. It's a Sportsman, and it was this ultralight one in the upper, you know, the snow pitcher one. And it had the 5-inch casters, and it had and I put it back down. I mean, it was a stainless Sportsman, and it was going to make such a difference in my mobility on the tennis court. But you know, when we first started, then go up a few more years, and I was at the University of Santa Barbara, and on the way home from halfway home from Santa Barbara to Laguna Beach was Woodland Hills, and Jeff lived in Woodland Hills. I would almost every time I would come home from school or go back up, I would stop and just hang out with Jeff. And one time when I was there, I was looking at that chair of his, and we're sitting in his kitchen, and I said, "Can I try your chair once?" And he said, "Sure." So I don't know if you remember, in those days we would kind of go up to each other sideways, and you'd just both transfer at the same time. And so I was sitting in his chair, and it was just amazing. It was basically the same thing as what you and Greg are sitting in down below.
Right. I remember sitting in those chairs in the very beginning, and even though it was too big for me and I needed to put a strap for my feet, I wanted that badly. And it represented freedom to me. What were some of the feelings you had when you got into a chair like that?
My first thing is I looked over at Jeff, and I said, "Jeff, you look so handicapped." And I realized he was sitting in my wheelchair, and he looked handicapped. And, you know, I never saw him like that before, because I always saw him in this sleek-looking chair. And I go, "You look handicapped." I go, "Is that the way I look?" You know, he kind of laughed or something. And I said, "Will you make me a chair like that?" And he said, "No, but I'll help you make one." And he did. He helped me make one, and then he made one for Eric Walls and probably you and Greg, and then Quadra happened, and that was kind of how that all kind of got started. But it made a difference on the tennis court. It made a difference just in everyday life. You felt so free. You had no brakes. You could take a full stroke without hitting your thumbs. In those days, you hit your thumbs and you'd hurt yourself on the brakes, and it was just so lightweight and so maneuverable. It had a little bit of camber in it. It was great.
So I'm going to apologize to everybody right now, because I was playing with my slides beforehand, and a slide that's supposed to be next got out of order, and I'm going to go look for it right now. And because this one's it's an important one, because this one I want to bring it. Oh, come on. Let's see if it's there. This one right here, where you're playing wheelchair tennis and you're wheelchair racing. And there is such a cool factor that I'm getting when I'm looking at these pictures of the activities that you're involved with and the people. How important was that, besides what you just mentioned about looking handicapped in that other chair and not in the one you were sitting in that was Jeff? How important was it to create relationships with other people and feel cool?
Well, I mean, you're a 20-year-old kid, and I think I was 20 around there, 19, 20 years old, and yeah, I mean it's important. You want to be kind of accepted, and when you see the young kids. I mean, I love going around today and seeing little kids in wheelchairs that have. You just don't see them in those goofy wheelchairs that you used to see them in back in these days, in the 70s and the 80s. Everybody has pretty much these lightweight, nice-looking wheelchairs. And when you see a little kid, and if a little kid's going to school in a really cool-looking wheelchair, he's gonna be an attraction, a magnet to a lot of kids. They're going to think he's cool. And kids love skateboards, and in fact, that's kind of our whole thing with like with Jeff and Eric and I when we were first starting Quadra, was when we got those really cool front casters that were neat. It was the
they were
skateboard.
like a skateboard wheel.
Yeah, and people would like even when my kids went high school. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I would go to the high school and I had this quickie that had the front wheels used to light up, and the comments that people would make, the kids would make on the high school campus about those, because the wheels light up, the little rollerblades light up in the front, and that you're in this kind of cool looking wheelchair. So for a young kid, I mean, for us in those days, I mean, we wanted something like that so badly. And when Jeff added the color, and we added Quadra, and we had chairs more like the lower one, although that's really a racing chair, and it was probably his first one. It was magical, and I mean it was beyond magical. I mean, that was the biggest frustration in my first few years for me, was centered around the actual wheelchair, trying to make this upper left-hand wheelchair something better. And I can remember, I took the armrests off, and I put the brakes down below. I still had the big casters in the front, but and eventually I cut the back down, and to try to make that something a little bit more functional. And I can remember just being so frustrated with the mechanics of that, and today's chairs are just so dynamite, and what a difference it makes for somebody who has to go through the tough thing of being paralyzed. Makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, again, because there might be quite a few people on here that don't know the name Quadra, that really was the first lightweight, everyday wheelchair and then sports chair that was built. And as you said, it changed the way you could move through the world. And it allowed you to do sports. And sports, do you think sports really help build people's self-esteem as well as fitness?
Absolutely. No question about it. Wheelchair sports, was really everything to me in those days. And it wasn't just the wheelchair sports, but it's the relationships that are associated with the sports. The friendships that were developed in learning from the other people. You come out of the rehab with a certain amount of knowledge, but where I started really learning was the first couple of years hanging around and meeting other guys and girls from around the country and learning how they do certain things, because it was all very, very new in those days. We didn't have the curb cutouts. Had a few handicap parkings, but not many. Life was in a wheelchair was way more challenging in learning how to pop curbs and learning how to do certain things, and then being around people who were inspiring and athletic was from a self-confidence standpoint. And then when I went away to college, I felt so much better about myself, and it helped so much for me. It was everything to me.
Well, from a practical standpoint, skincare, sitting in these new pieces of equipment and, sometimes for hours at a time, how did you take care of your skin so that, you didn't get any pressure sores and things like that?
I've been pretty lucky. I've just never really had a pressure sore. Now, I've always walked on the braces and the crutches even today I still do a little bit, not as much, but I've always walked, and I've always kind of thought that was part of it. However, when you're on the braces and crutches, if you don't have a chair nearby, you're going to eventually have to sit down somewhere, and you have to make sure that you sit down on something careful. They drilled into me at rehab, the problems with pressure sores, and I've just tried to be really, really careful. Maybe.
So what I hear you saying is that you've really paid attention. You've kept track of it, and not let too much time go by without checking to make sure there's not pressure areas that are developing.
Yeah, and then today I use a Rojo cushion, which some people like and some people don't. And I think that is helpful. Mm-hmm. But I just have always tried to be very, very careful and watch it. And I've, knock on wood, I've never really had. I haven't really had. I've had just you get little abrasions from time to time, and when you have those, you be careful with it. But I've never really had I've never had a pressure sore or anything. So, and I think it's just, I think the walking helped. I think being active helps because you're moving around a lot, and then being aware of, you can't just sit on the ground, on the cement ground, and crawl around and stuff. You just can't do that. And I think eating well, but I think active lifestyle and eating well too also helps. Because you have then you have better circulation and I don't know.
I agree with you. I fully agree with you. And in fact, you segued right into the eating well, active lifestyle. Those are two pieces that I find are essential in living a healthy and a well life. So let's talk spotlight sport right now, wheelchair tennis. What are some of the rules? And, from what I know about tennis, there's singles, doubles, up, down. What do all these things mean?
Well, okay. Obviously there's singles and doubles. And the rules in wheelchair tennis are that we're allowed 2 bounces, and those rules are in the official rules of tennis that the International Tennis Federation puts it out. We are fully integrated into that sport. We are run by the International Tennis Federation internationally and the USTA, United States Tennis Association, nationally. And so the first bounce has to land in the court, and that's when the count. Second bounce, can land anywhere. And that's been the rules from the very beginning. In fact, those rules go back to an article that was written in Sports and Spokes by Cliff Crace back in 1976, summer of 76, and Jeff was teaching tennis with some able-bodied pro, I forget his name right now, but over at Griffith Park, and I think the two of them came up with a list of rules, and there were other rules that he had in there, and I can remember when Jeff sat down and talked to me when we had that, just before that first tournament in 1977, and he goes, "Brad, what rules do you think we should have?" And I said, "I think we should have the 2-bounce rule, and I don't think we should have anything else." And that's pretty much stayed that way ever since. It's, I think that 2-bounce rule that Jeff came up with was brilliant, and it's been a huge part of the game, as well as, of course, the lightweight wheelchair. I think without the lightweight wheelchair, there's no way you could that you could have had as many people be able to play. Because in the early days, the advantages were to the more disabled person. The one who amputee or a polio who really had the good balance and the coordination. And as these chairs progressed over the years, it's enabled. I never thought a lot of the disabled that are playing wheelchair tennis, especially somebody like we'll talk later on, like Nick Taylor, would ever really have been able to play the game at the level that they're playing. And but it's been the lightweight wheelchair as well as the two balances that have made the big difference. And then, tennis is a sport where you can play with an able-bodied person, and up-down means, one person standing up and one person sitting down. And there's an example on the right of me doing that with Dennis Ralston, who, interesting enough, was the Davis Cup captain and a great touring pro, is now an amputee. Lost his leg, but he's still playing some tennis and doing well. But anyway,
up down. That's pure integration right there, isn't it?
Yep. And it's there are players all over the country who do play in USTA leagues, and most of the people in those leagues are going to be able-bodied, and you've got one person in a wheelchair, and so I think that's one of the fun things about wheelchair tennis. That there's other sports, of course, that you can go out riding and skiing and other things now. But back in those days, that was really, really special. I mean, you recall, wheelchair basketball, track, and then tennis was the new thing. I mean, that was the new, exciting, real different thing, and so.
Well, and absolutely, that was, the feeling for me to be able to integrate into mainstream activity at any time was important, and wheelchair tennis offered that right from the very beginning, and it made a huge difference. And the technique of the sport are exactly the same, right? I mean, there's just a little background.
Yeah, they're a little different, but we developed our techniques early on, just through the regular game, and we picked up some things from wheelchair basketball as far as mobility was concerned, and then in the early 1990s, Randy, I think, took a lot of the technique, he and Balmore, to a whole new level. They produced a book about wheelchair tennis and really focused on mobility and drills associated with mobility and mobility techniques, and named these techniques so other people could learn the techniques and have a name associated with those techniques. And he really took the sport to a whole new level. And early before that, we just kind of watched each other, and we thought we knew what we were doing, and we did know what we were doing, but I mean, he then took what we were doing and really categorized it and taught it and expanded on it and took it to a whole new level. And of course, you have Randy down the lower. The new chairs also at that point in time started to develop, where you had the 3 and the 4 wheel chairs that were specifically designed for tennis, and that whole mobility thing to a whole new level. You have the wheel in the back. You can see that with the fellow on the David Wagner on the right. Yeah, he's got the wheel in the back, which I think Jim Black actually had a lot to do with that when he was working with Quickie as well. But on that technique, but that what made it. Everybody now has pretty much either 1 or 2 wheels in the front, used mostly 2, and then the 1 in the back, and then you have this huge camber, and they're very, very tippy, so that they really do turn on a dime, and the mobility is so much greater today, and the techniques associated with the game, have just improved. So it's really when I was at the Paralympics this last summer, I was just sitting there in the stands watching, and I just had the same feeling that you would feel if you were sitting at the U.S. Open watching the top pros play professional tennis. You felt like you were at a professional tennis tournament. It was really an amazing feeling to be there and to be a part of that this last year.
Yeah, to see the professionalism actually felt in the audience shows you how far the sport has come, and also, for instance, how how much credibility it's gained with all the integration that's happened throughout the sport. And one of the questions I wanted to ask about that wheel in the back was, does it keep the chair from tipping over?
Yes, it does. Yeah,
and how much do these chairs cost?
They're right around $3,500. I mean, you can get them. I mean, I've seen them advertised, probably for $1,500. Some of the tennis chairs, but the top of the line are going to be in the $3,500 range, and so it's like, which is actually cheaper than some of the equipment that's out there. I mean, sometimes you're paying $5,000 and $6,000 for some hand cycles and things these days. So really, $1,500 to $3,500 isn't too bad. And there's so many tennis chairs available. I mean, as far as getting a second-hand tennis chair, I'm sure is a little bit easier.
Can you use your tennis chair for a wheelchair basketball chair too?
I think you probably could. They're different today because you have the the guards. They're like the quad rugby chairs. They have the cards, and I think a lot of the basketball ones have those. But I still think that they're quite similar. You can certainly use a wheelchair basketball chair for tennis, or a quad rugby chair for tennis.
For tennis.
I would imagine.
So we've got a little 30-second video that shows some wheelchair tennis action, and feel free to speak over it.
Okay.
And I gotta press play.
Well, this is
Bob, is that you?
I think this.
You want me to hit it? Yeah, I'll hit it. There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
What somebody who has determination, what they can accomplish. I mean, here you got some great photos. This is right after they won the doubles final and the gold medal for doubles, and then David Wagner, who was the silver medalist. You can see with this tape, he tapes his hand to the racket because he doesn't have the gripping ability. David plays just great tennis and very high level tennis.
Now, is that one of the techniques that someone who's quadriplegic would do to be able to hold on to the racket? Is tape? Are there actual gloves that you can use to do that?
I don't think I don't think anybody. There might be. If there were for years, there were some guys who, in fact, I think Greg Thompson came up with a plastic that he had made from an orthotist, where it was molded plastic and his hand fit in, so he could just then the plastic would come around his hand and give him support, and then he would Velcro it around, and so it made it easier to get in and out. But I think most of the guys are going back to the tape because they just get a better grip with it today. But there is a variety of things that people do, but I think I'm seeing more tape these days, and needed.
Now we have another video, and this is another one that you supplied to us, and this is again Nick, and it's actually going to show his.
But he can hit. He hits a very, very powerful forehand and can hit some reasonable backhands as well. So it is phenomenal to see this guy play.
And we have resources that are on our group page for any of the listeners that want to learn more about wheelchair tennis. But a place to learn is at a tennis camp, right?
That's right. It's the best place to learn, and the tennis camps have really progressed today to where they, you get so much instruction and you get so much opportunity to hit. You're going to hit a lot of balls, but you can also learn to play there. It's not just for the advanced players. We break people up into groups, so the best players will play with each other, and the drilling will be more intense. We're talking about people who might be even on World Cup teams, could potentially be there, all the way to somebody who's never picked up a racket before, and they're going to learn to play the game. So really, it's a great opportunity to meet others and to really learn the game. And Randy's camp coming up is going to be led by Bal Moore, who was Randy's coach, and Dan James, who is today the USA team head coach. They're both just phenomenal instructors, and they've asked me to be there too, and I'm going to be there, and looking forward to just kind of carrying on Randy's legacy, which really were the camps. Randy had, after he retired and really towards the end of his career, he really developed these camps with Bal Moore and ran them all across the world, and he's that's kind of was, he was just great at it. He was very enthusiastic, and that's important with tennis, is to be enthusiastic. But Randy was, Randy just had a personality that was very attractive, so
right.
Anyway.
He's very engaging, very, very engaging. And for our listeners that don't know, Randy passed on 3 years ago, and there's been a foundation that's been started in his name to, again, further and promote wheelchair tennis for all comers, as it says. And here we are in the question and answers. Thank you so much, Brad, for all of this information and all the backstory that you've offered us. It's, honestly, it's such an honor and a thrill for me to be able to sit here and interview you, because it's just a dear friend and a stellar person, absolutely. So we've got a question from Dave Van Cleef. Brad, do you feel that wheelchair tennis has become less inclusive with the ITF lessening of the quad divisions?
Well, it certainly wouldn't have anything to do with the USTA. The USTA is very supportive of the quad division, and as far as I know, and internationally, there's been some talk of wanting to maybe eliminate it at the high level, but I don't think that could ever happen. And we discussed that even during the Paralympics. They invited several people who they've chosen as ambassadors for wheelchair tennis, and we met before the day's competitions and talked about it. And wheelchair tennis is a part of the World Team Cup. It's a part of the Grand Slams, and I highly doubt that would ever change. And so I don't see quad tennis being eliminated or not, encouraged. In fact, when I was at the games, I had the opportunity. Well, I was introduced to Prince Edward, and Prince Edward, of the royal family. I probably spent 15 minutes talking to him about wheelchair tennis, and his main topic of conversation and who he spent most of his time watching. Now, on the center court at that time, and he was watching some of that match, was the top British player and the top Swedish player playing in this great epic match. And he left that match to go watch Nick Taylor, and all he wanted to talk about was Nick Taylor and how amazing Nick Taylor was. He knew Nick Taylor's name, and he knew quite a bit about wheelchair tennis. So quad tennis is very important to the game, and to me, there's nothing more inspirational than to see David play when he was playing, and Steve Everett, and to see Nick Taylor play, and those guys just blow my mind. And Nick is an incredible guy. And Dave, so are you.
Great ambassadors, right? Well, I've got another question for you. What do you suggest we do to get more people in wheelchairs interested in learning the sport?
Well, I think it's important to go back to a lot of the basics that what we did when we first started the wheelchair tennis, and we tried to do exhibitions and clinics whenever we could, and do whatever we could to promote the game. And I think that the harder thing today compared to when we were doing it was tennis was a new thing. There wasn't as many activities. Today there's so many activities for the disabled, so many opportunities for people, and I think that that's just going to be a challenge that you just got to accept. But I think that the USTA is still pretty active in doing camps. I think camps like the Randy camp that we're going to be doing in April in Dallas is going to be good, and I think any time that I know when I get on Facebook, I see guys like Tony Lara constantly doing clinics and exhibitions, and the Ability Show is this weekend in LA, and I'll guarantee you that Tony Lara is probably doing a wheelchair tennis demo and clinic there at the Ability Show. And so, I mean, these are the kind of things that I think help develop tennis, and I just hope it continues to grow, because I think it is a great sport. But I'm also excited for wheelchair sports that, you can ski, you can surf, you can, there's just, ride bikes on a hand cycle. There's just so many fun things that we can do today that we couldn't do when we were first injured.
Right. And I've got another question for you. One is, at a national level, where do you see the biggest need for funding in wheelchair tennis?
Probably just development, developing clinics. I mean, I know that other countries are probably more supportive to national teams and development teams and that sort of thing. And I'm not involved on a day-to-day basis, so there are other people who could probably answer this question better than me. But I think that just developing the sport by doing clinics. One of the things that we developed in the early days of wheelchair tennis were programs where they had the Dallas Wheelchair Tennis Club, and they had the Southern California Wheelchair Tennis Club, and we had a place where we could go and play once a week, and then we actually were able to do little fundraisers where we had enough money where we could then travel to various tournaments. And I think that's the hard thing about wheelchair tennis compared to if you're an able-bodied tennis player. You can play plenty of tournaments in your hometown or in your community, your county or whatever, where with wheelchair tennis, you're probably going to have to travel a little bit. You're going to have to go out of state if you're going to play tournaments, and that costs money. And so that's where the clubs come in, that were real successful back when we first started out, and I think those could be helpful. So, maybe there could be some funding from a national level that would be distributed to, groups like that. I don't know.
Well, I think it's all great information, and if anybody wants to know more about the upcoming All-Comers Camp, the Randy Snow Push Forward Foundation, the information's on our group page, and here's a list of our resources where you can find a lot of the information. We're at the top of the hour, unfortunately. I could spend another hour easily speaking with you, Brad, and spending time with you. And I'm going to be able to spend time with you in Dallas because I'm coming to the Push Forward Foundation Randy Snow All-Comers as a volunteer. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much, Brad.
That'd be great. Candace, it was just wonderful to be able to speak to you and share a few things with you. And we could go on and on and on. We'll have to do that in Dallas and catch up a little bit. So it'd be great.
We will. We'll have time there. Yeah.
And
it'll be
just
great.
For everybody's
Thank you,
sake,
everybody.
But just for everybody's sake, before we hang up, /sports is christopherreeve.org/sports is the group we created to talk about adaptive sports. So if you have questions, Candace goes in there and checks them out. There's additional resources there, as we said. /webcasts is where this will be posted tomorrow. As soon as I get in and download it, I'll get it posted there, along with the other things that Candace has done and some of the other parts of our series here, our Live Better series. And then /Life After Paralysis is actually where you'll find Candace's blog about many things, not just sports, as well as a bunch of other bloggers that we have that are blogging along with the Reeve Foundation. And then /community is just our online paralysis community if you're just looking for just general information from people that are out there in the world and or just looking for some friends. And then, of course, randysnow.org. Don't forget their tennis camp that's coming up. And I thank you both for being here. It was wonderful. It was crazy wonderful. And, Candace, I should say this, too, that next month you are doing, what is your topic next month? The second Wednesday of next month at 4 o'clock. I think we're doing cross-country skiing.
We're doing cross-country skiing for sit-down skiers.
All right.
And then a week from today at the same time, 4 p.m. Eastern, we'll have Gary Carpet back, and he will be doing wheelchair selection. So we've got a full slate of things happening around here. So thank you both, and thanks, everyone, for tuning in today. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everybody.